I've put out a number of videos on reliable or trustworthy sources. But that begs the question, how did I decide, and how would you decide whether or not these sources are actually trustworthy or reliable? Let's have a look. Hi, I'm Kashmir, and today I want to look at what makes a source reliable or trustworthy. Let's start with what doesn't actually make it reliable or trustworthy. It isn't reliable just because the person who put it out is famous, beautiful, charismatic, a good dancer, or born in the Middle East. Now, that doesn't mean that these people are not reliable, but it isn't enough in itself, even if the person is all of them. And it isn't enough that the information was published, whether it is in a book or online. In fact, usually the online stuff is the most suspect. We will begin by actually looking at the information itself. There are two major ways of gaining information: personal observation or research. Let's have a look at personal observation first. Personal observation can be very useful. For example, most of the information I've learned from Denise Annan has come from her own personal observation. When you look at personal observation, though, you need to ask a few questions like, how much observation? How many times? For how long? What was the background of the person who observed? For example, if you don't speak the language, you may often be put off. If you don't speak the language, you may often make a mistake about what you're seeing. In Denise's case, that's fine. She was born in Egypt, she speaks Egyptian, and she spent many years actually observing the dance. So when she says, this is how I have seen a Saidi woman move, and it's typical, then I believe her. However, if my neighbour, who only speaks English, spends 3 days and 2 nights in Cairo and comes back and tells me what she saw, especially if it doesn't gel with things I've also heard from more reliable people, I probably won't pay an awful lot of attention to it. If you're researching, then you need to say where the research comes from. In a book, this is quite simple. There's usually references, normally at the back. Occasionally you'll see them as footnotes, but that's pretty old-fashioned these days. So when you see something like Serpent of the Nile and you come across a very controversial statement, the first thing you do is say, oh, how did she come up with that? Let's have a look. Then you turn to the references and find there's none. Okay, so that's probably not a reliable statement. Go on a few years, Wendy puts out another book called I Put a Spell on You, and here we are. This one's got references, great. And you have a look, and it references Serpent of the Nile, which you already know is a little bit suspect in some of its information. So it's not enough to have the references have to be useful, and for that you often have to do a little bit of work and have a look at them. Online, it is much, much harder. There is also the ability to have peer review. This is pretty uncommon in belly dance, but for example with Habibi we had Shireen, with Arabesque we have Ibrahim Farah, who were generally knowledgeable and can actually keep an eye on what was being published in their name. That happens with other books occasionally, and you actually see even committees of people checking out what goes into the book. A general editor, however, with no real belly dance experience other than maybe a couple of classes, is not going to do an awful lot of good. It has to be somebody with a good background. And the experience has to be relevant. If I want to find out about Turkish or Persian dance, then as much as I admire them, I'm not going to go to Denise or Dr. Mo, because their experience is in the field of Egyptian dance. In that case, I'd probably turn to the community, to people that I trust, and ask them, who's the person who can fill me in on this? And you'll usually come up with a few ideas. When you have a look at that, then again, it's the same sort of thing. How long has this person looked into this information? How many years? how many different sources, how many different trips. There's not much point in having an expert who's been to one workshop from one person and then has decided to make themselves an expert and write it all up. You want someone with a deeper, more complex, more nuanced experience than that. However, it isn't all about just putting forward information. Information can be really useful, but there comes a time when you actually want to see how it all fits together. You want some conclusions. You want to know how this piece of information and that piece of information are connected. In this case, what you need to know is, first of all, what the information is, obviously, and what drove the person's thinking. It's also handy to know if the person has any particular biases, their worldview, their limitations of their worldview, or even commercial considerations. So if you see someone who's put out a video and they're quite upfront about it, they said, I've done a couple of hours of research on Google and this is what I think. No, a couple of hours of research on Google is not research, and we won't count that as a trustworthy source. Some people don't like authors to editorialize. As a person who likes editorializing myself, I beg to differ. But what's important is that the person has to make this explicit. Here are the facts. Here is what I believe. Putting the two together, this is what I think happens or should happen. It just needs to be made explicit. If there are images used and they're used for anything more than just pretty, then you need to know where those images came from. It makes a big difference, for example. If you have a painting that was painted from an observer in the Middle East, it's quite different from one that was done in a French artist's studio, for example, with a local artist's model. In one case it's reliable, in the other case it isn't. If you just see the picture itself, you've got no idea how reliable it should be. So you need to know what were the circumstances that this was actually created. Kathleen Fraser does a really good job in her book where she takes multiple paintings and she combines them with traveller's tales, and she puts them together and combines them in a way that makes those paintings be really, really useful. And you keep flipping back and go, oh yes, I see what she means. To summarise, we need to look first of all at the author of the material. Is this person reliable? Is this person knowledgeable? Are they likely to be able to bring the needed information to the article, the book, the video? What are the author's sources? If you don't know what the sources are at all, usually at this point you'd say, oh, well, unless it's something that I really need to know, I think I'll walk now. Once you know the sources, then you need to look at those sources. If they're sourcing something which in itself is unreliable, then there's no point in continuing. You need to know if there are conclusions. First of all, what was the data that fed into the conclusions and what the author's personal biases may be. After this, as a bonus video, I've taken the 2 videos I've made on reliable online sources and reliable books, and from those I've actually picked my top 7 and put them together in a single video to give you an idea of the sort of thing that you can rely on in this world of post-truth.